Hey guys, today we are talking about lesson 12.5. I am looking at page 665, and we are going to change things up a little bit today. The last few days we've been talking about customary units of measure and comparing them to other customary units of measure. Today we're going to talk about line plots, and we are going to be interpreting line plots, with some fractional data. So let's look at our first example here. I'll go ahead and explain how this works to you. In our first example here, we've got that the problem says the data shows the length of the buttons in Jen's collection. For an art project, she wants to know how many buttons are longer than 1/4 inch. So you can see there is the chart where it says length of buttons in Jen's collection right over here. Okay, and there's all of the lengths of each one of those buttons listed. So we're going to use a line plot to graph the data that shows the frequency of data alongside a number line. There's a couple steps of that. So first, if we look up here at this data that I circled, it tells us the different lengths, okay? And then if we look right down here where it says step 1, we're going to order the data from least to greatest lengths and complete the tally table. So that's this right here, right there. Okay, but very first we want to see what our options are before, because when you go to do this on your own, you'll have to write those values in there in the length. So when we look up at our first chart there where it says Jen's collection, length of buttons in Jen's collection, we've got 1/4, 3/4, and 4/4 as our options. So we'll write them in order from least to greatest. So 1/4 being the smallest, then 3/4, and then 4/4. Okay, so writing them from least to greatest, and then now we're going to give each one of them their own box so that we can tally the amount of times that we see each one. So the system I'll use for this is simply to go from left to right and tally each time that I see each one of those fractional values. So we've got our very first one listed is 1/4, so I'm going to mark it off up there, and I'm going to give it one tally right here. And I'm marking it off on top so that I can make sure that I don't accidentally tally one more than once or skip one. So next I've got a 3/4, so I'm going to mark that one off and give it a tally mark down here. Then I've got 4/4, mark it off, tally mark. Then I've got 1/4, tally mark, and mark it off, and then our final one's 4/4 down here. Okay, and then if I look at the amount of values that I have up top, oh, did I skip one? I did. I need another 1/4. That's where marking it off is good. The values up at the top, I'm going to count how many there are, and that should be the same amount of tally marks that I have in my second graph. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values in this chart up here. So I should see 6 tally marks down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so my next step, now that I've filled out my tally table, is to go down here to step number 3, and we've got our line plot, and we need to label our line plot on the bottom for the values that each of the lengths that are given. Now, you can see that there are 4 spots and there are 3 values given to us. So we are also going to add in our 2/4 spot because that falls in there. So we have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4. Okay, and then all we're going to do here is simply put an X above the value based off of how many tally marks there are on that value. So I see up here that I've got 3 tally marks for 1/4, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Okay, I have none in the 2/4, so I'm just going to skip on over to 3/4, and I see I've got 1 tally mark, so I'm going to put an X right there for the 3/4, and then 4/4, I see that there are 2, so I'm going to go 1, 2. Okay, so I'm going to look at my question we are trying to answer before so I can interpret this line plot. And our question that we are answering is that Jen wants to know how many buttons are longer than 1/4 inch. Okay, So longer than, that means not equal to. So I'm not going to count these ones because those are all 1/4 inch. I am going to look at these ones because 3/4 and 4/4 are both longer than 1/4. And I've got 1, 2, 3 that land over there. So there are 3 buttons that are longer than 1/4 inch. Okay, and then we're looking right down here on numbers 1 and 2. How many buttons are in Jen's collection? So that's just asking how many total buttons there are. So I can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 based off of the number of X's that I have on my plot. Okay, and then we've got what is the difference in length between the longest button and the shortest button in Jen's collection. Now difference, when we hear that word, that should tell us immediately what operation to do. Which would be subtraction. And we've got 4/4 is our longest one, minus 1/4 is our shortest one. And when we solve that, we know that when we add or subtract with fractions, we do not do anything with our denominator. It stays the same. So we have 4 as our denominator, and then all we have to do is 4 minus 1, and we end up with 3/4. Okay? All right, so let's try one more before I send you on to your homework. We're moving over to example 2 on this next page, page 666. And in this example, it says some of the students in Miss Lee's class walk to school. The data shows the distance these students walk. What distance do most students walk? Okay, so we're going to do our number 1 here, order the data from least to greatest distances and complete the tally table. So we've got all of our distances up here in this chart right here. We've got 1/2, 1/4, 3/4, and those are the 3 different values that we've got. So our smallest value, or our least value, would be the 1/4 value. Then we've got 1/2, and then 3/4. And then we'll go ahead and fill them in right here from least to greatest. So we've got 1/4 in our top one. We've got 1/2 next, and then 3/4 next. All right, now let's go ahead and start getting our tally marks drawn into our tally table. So our first one is 1/2, so we'll tally it and mark it off. Our second one is 1/2 as well. We'll tally it, mark it off. That first tally could be a little bit bigger. Mark it off. Then we've got 1/4, mark off. 3/4, 1/4 again, and 2 1/2. So I'm just going to mark them both off and mark them both down here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tally marks, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 data pieces in my original data. So that lines up really well. So now let's go ahead and move down to step number 3. And we will go ahead and label our fraction lengths on the number line, and then we will put our X's for each one. So we'll start with 1/4, then 1/2, then 3/4. Okay, so then I'm looking at how many tallies I have for 1/4. I've got 2. I'm going to go 1, 2. 1/2, I've got 4. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And 3/4, I'm going to just put my 1. So I'm going to look at the question again up at the top where it says what distance do most students walk. And so I'm looking for the one with the highest frequency, and I'm seeing 1/2 the most. So I'm going to say most students walk 1/2 of a mile. Okay, now I'm looking right next below that, number 3, we've got how many more students walk 1/2 of a mile than 1/4 of a mile to school. So I'm looking at my data for 1/2 of a mile, and I've got 4 students. And then I see how many students are walking 1/4 of a mile, and there are 2 students. And I'm seeing how many more, which means that we are more than. It means we're comparing. When we compare, we subtract. So we've got 4 minus 2, and that gives me 2. So there are 2 more students. And then number 4 there asks us what is the difference between the longest distance and the shortest distance that students walk. So our longest distance is 3/4. Our shortest distance is 1/4. And again, we're seeing that word difference, which should tell us that we are subtracting. So we've got, again, with subtraction with fractions, the 4 stays the same on the bottom. And then we've got 3 minus 2, which is, 3 minus 1, which is 2. I was ahead of myself. So we've got 2/4. Or, if we simplify that, 1/2. Okay. And then our final question down there that's kind of cut off says, what if a new student joins Miss Lee's class who walks 3/4 mile to school? How would the line plot change? And we would simply just put one more X right there. Okay. And so that's all there is to it. When you guys go to do your homework, you will need to do numbers 1 through 4. And then on number 4 down there, it does not have a tally table, but you can go ahead and draw your own tally table to help yourself out. It says to do it on a separate sheet of paper, but there is plenty of space off to the side of your homework to go ahead and do it on this homework sheet. So when you take a picture to turn it into me on Seesaw, you can just have it drawn on the side of your sheet somewhere. And that's all there is to it. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, you guys have a good day.